Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I had a few hours to fish, so I decided to target Lake Camanche on the South Shore side again. However, today's episode, I feel as if there were some miscommunication in regards to these kind of reservoirs, or shall I say, these managed reservoirs. I am fishing just power bait today, so with a very basic Carolina rig, I have about a 3.5 feet leader to a small size 10 snell hook, and I will be fishing both power eggs and some garlic power bait. As I've mentioned already in my previous episodes, the water is cold and I am targeting a condensed area. I am not giving this power bait a very far cast, but just roughly about 10 feet from the bank. I only had a few hours to fish today, so I will take whatever I can get. However, the main important thing about this episode is I want to explain a little bit about these managed reservoirs that are run by these concessionaires, whether it be East Bay Municipal or whether a private concessionaire like Rocky Mountain Recreation. So for the anglers that are not local to this area or are new to this kind of fishing, whenever targeting these privately ran reservoirs for rainbow trout in general during the winter and spring period, or even during the fall period, yes, there will be a fishing fee charged to fish these lakes. New subscribers and anglers to this channel whom are not aware of how these reservoirs work are often a little bit confused when they show up to these kind of reservoirs and they are charged a day use and a fishing fee altogether. Well, I'm going to do my best to try and explain so that way there isn't much confusion if you guys were to try and target these kind of reservoirs. The rod on the right hand side ended up getting a bite and I didn't really have time to set up the bite camera, but I did end up picking up a really nice fish. Now back onto the topic of why these reservoirs would charge a fishing fee. The reason these kind of reservoirs charge a fishing fee is because all these fish that are planted into this reservoir during the season, whether it be fall, winter, and spring, are all privately purchased. The fishing fee charged is used to replenish the stocks of fish that are planted into these reservoirs. Therefore, unlike those public reservoirs like Folsom Lake, Lake Shasta, New Melones, and Lake Berryessa, where there are no fishing fee to fish, those fish are provided by the government agencies. There are both pros and cons to both methods. This was a very nice rainbow trout, and I'll land him quickly and I'll put him on the stringer. I only have 2 hours to fish today, so I'll take whatever I can get. So as for the pros and cons, I'm going to address the pros first. The pros about these privately ran reservoirs or managed reservoirs are often the sizes of fish and the numbers of fish that can be caught from the bank or on a watercraft. These kind of reservoirs can often offer a lot of anglers a great opportunity to take a handful of fish home for the table, and they have very little restrictions in regards to gear or whether or not bait is allowed, therefore making it a great area for anglers who just want to catch a handful of fish to take home. The rod on the right hand side ended up getting a bite, and I caught myself another very nice rainbow trout. Now I'm going to address the cons about fishing these bodies of water. One of the biggest complaints I often see is the cost associated with fishing these bodies of water. Yes, they can be relatively pricey, and if an angler were to get skunked, more times than not, it will often leave a very bad impression to those anglers. Another criticism I often see about fishing these kind of reservoirs is often the case of a lot of die-hard trout anglers associating these fish that come off the back of trucks as not real trout. I've seen comments on other channels and on my channel as well associating these pellet-fed trout or these glug-eating power bait trout as not a real trout. However, a lot of those anglers don't realize that real trout, wild trout in general, do not get really big around these areas. The anglers that criticize these kind of reservoirs and these kind of fish often associate their reservoirs as real trout, but little do they realize that most of those trout in those bodies of water that they associate as real trout came off the back of a truck as well as fingerlings. Most of the criticism seemed to be coming from the High Sierra anglers, but a lot of those High Sierra anglers don't realize that a large portion of their bodies of waters are planted by the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in California. This was a very nice holdover fish. Judging from all its fins and the copepods on it, I assume this fish must have survived from last year's spring plant. So hopefully today's short little episode explains my take on these kind of reservoirs. The managed reservoirs often run by concessionaires or a handful of companies here in the Central Valley and the Bay Area. I ended up getting a bite on the right hand rod again, and I knew right away that this fish was on, but he was acting a little bit funny. But ultimately, I found out that he was swimming towards me, and once he ended up loading up the rod, I picked up the rod and I knew I caught myself another very nice fish before calling it quits for the day. I understand that this style of fishing isn't exactly every trout angler's cup of tea. However, in my opinion, as I've mentioned in my past episodes, whenever I'm trout fishing, I am not a trophy fisherman. I am as happy to catch a little 8-inch trout from a wild stream with artificials, and I'm as equally happy to catch a fish from these bodies of water, whether it be a planted fish or a holdover fish. At the end of the day, if it's a fishing opportunity, whether it involves a planted fish or a wild fish, I am down to catch both. As I've already mentioned earlier at the beginning of this episode, these bodies of waters will often offer a much larger grade of fish for the anglers to target. Unlike the public reservoirs that are managed by the state or state parks, a lot of those public bodies of waters will often be planted by our California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And as many anglers here on this channel know, the Department of Fish and Wildlife considers a stocking-sized trout to be roughly about 8 inches to 10 inches, which will often be a much smaller grade of fish. So generally speaking, it is a trade-off. If an angler wants to target a larger grade of fish, I find that these bodies of water will often offer a much bigger grade of fish to target with much better quality than those in the public reservoirs. But that is my personal opinion, so if you guys have other opinions, drop a comment below and let me know what you guys think. This was another very nice holdover fish. I'll land him quickly and I'll show him to you guys real quick before calling it quits for the day. This fish was gorgeous, full fin, and very bright indeed. Overall, it was just a great little short session out here on the banks of Lake Camanche. I didn't catch my limit, but I did catch these 3 gorgeous trout. I ended up getting some nice bright orange fillets from them. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, tight lines y'all.